All right, this is what we are doing on Wednesday, December 11th. This is our first day of Unit 2. So you're going to need new notes, new homework packet, new bell ringers. If you missed class, make sure you have those before you start watching. Otherwise, you're going to have to go back and do the notes anyway. All right, so let's go over the bell ringer. If you haven't done it yet, pause now. All right, so a instinct that you're gonna have to fight is to look at this and go, oh, they all look the same. We don't know that for sure. We can't assume that. We also can't assume, even though it looks like it, we can't assume that CD is perpendicular to EH or AB is perpendicular to EF. We cannot assume that. We don't know that for sure. So we can only go in knowing that these are the angles, and that angle 4 and angle 7 are congruent. That's our given information. However, there is an angle relationship here that we've talked about before. Each angle across the vertex is congruent. So 3 is congruent to 7, 2 is congruent to 6, 1 is congruent to 5, 8 is congruent to 4, and I think I already said 7 is congruent to 3. So we know that these two are congruent, and we know that these two are congruent. So if 4 is congruent to 7 and 3 is congruent to 7, then they're also congruent to each other. So we know that A is true. We know that 4 is congruent to 8. We know that 4 is congruent to 3. So we know that 3 and 8 are congruent. We know that 7 and 3 are congruent because they are vertical. And we know that 7 and 8 are congruent because 4 is congruent to 8 and 4 is congruent to 7. So they must be equal to each other. So we know E is true. That leaves B as our only option. We do not know with the given information that 2 and 3 are equal. So that is our warm-up for today. All right. So in your notes packet, which is the green one this time, I think, we've got 4 vocabulary words. A transversal is a line that intersects 2 or more coplanar lines at different points. All of this unit is going to cover coplanar lines. We're only dealing with one plane at a time here. So a transversal is any line that crosses 2 or more other lines. Okay, before we go on, so when 2 lines intersect, they create 4 angles at their intersection. Transversal lines create multiple intersections, so they create multiple sets of 4 angles, and those angles have relationships with each other. The first relationship we have is alternate angles. These are non-adjacent angles. They do not share a side or a vertex, that are on opposite sides of the transversal line. So here's what that looks like. When they're between the lines, when they're opposite sides of the transversal, between the 2 lines, they are alternate interior angles. When they are outside the lines, on opposite sides, they are exterior alternate angles. Then we have consecutive angles that are on the same side of the transversal line. Same side of the transversal line, interior, between the lines, exterior, outside the lines. So consecutive interior, consecutive exterior. And then we have corresponding angles. They are on the same side of the transversal and the same side of their respective lines. So if we look a little bit closer at our example here, you can see that here's the transversal line, and they're both below their respective lines. Here's the transversal line. They're on the same side of that, and they're both to the left of their respective lines. This one, they're both to the left. They're both to the right over here. And they're on the same side of the transversal lines. These are not corresponding angles. These are corresponding angles. All right, so this is on your notes. When we look at this, what kind of line is this? It is a transversal line. So make sure you write transversal in that box. Then we're going to jump down and look at the chart we've got. We're going to identify some different kinds of angles. So looking at this diagram, this figure, let's find some alternate interior angles. Remember, alternate means opposite side of the transversal. T is our transversal here. So opposite sides of T, and they need to be between M and N to be interior. So 4 and 6, opposite sides of T, between M and N, and 3 and 5, opposite sides of T, between M and N. Those are our pairs of alternate interior angles. Alternate exterior, still different sides, but now outside the lines. So that's going to be 1 and 7, opposite sides, outside the lines, and 8 and 2. Next row, consecutive interior. Consecutive is the same side of the transversal. Interior between M and N. So our pairs are going to be 4 and 5, same side of T, between M and N, and 3 and 6, same side of T, between M and N. Our corresponding angles, remember that a corresponding angle is on the same side of the transversal and the same side of its respective line. So essentially, every intersection has like a top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. Corresponding is just which one is top left here. There's also a top left here. So they're going to be 1 and 5, 2 and 6, 4 and 8, and 3 and 7 are our corresponding angles. Each of these describes a pair. You can't have an individual angle that is an alternate interior angle, and you can't have more than 2 that belong to the same relationship. These are relationships between pairs of angles. So this gets more complicated slightly when we're dealing with parallel lines in a transversal. When a transversal cuts through parallel lines, it still creates all of these relationships. These relationships are created no matter what lines, what the lines that the transversal cuts through are like. But when those lines are parallel, now we have a special relationship. So alternate interior, remember opposite sides of the transversal between the lines. For example, 4 and 5. And the special relationship that those have, you're now filling out the second chart on your page. The relationship here is they are congruent. They are the same measure. They're equal. Alternate exterior, it's different sides of the transversal, but outside the lines. 2 and 7 would be an example. And they are also congruent. They are also the same measure. And then corresponding angles, remember, same side of the transversal, same side of the respective line. Top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. So 1 and 5 would be a good example here. And they are also congruent. Corresponding angles are congruent when the lines are parallel. So an example of consecutive interior, remember consecutive is same side of the transversal. Interior is between the lines. So 4 and 6. And you'll notice that 6 is an acute angle. It is definitely less than 90 degrees, whereas 4 is an obtuse angle. So definitely more than 90 degrees. So they can't be congruent. Acute and obtuse cannot be congruent. But they are supplementary. They add to 180. It's important to remember the difference between angles that are supplementary and angles that are congruent, because that's how we're going to set up equations so that we can solve for unknown variables. Last part of this chart on the next video, because I'm running out of time. Next video.